Hey guys, today we're looking at the PDP REMATCH, a third-party controller for the Nintendo Switch. So this one here is the Mario Kart variant, which I think looks pretty cool. I've seen these on Amazon new. I think their starting price is 25 bucks, but I've seen them as low as 18. So is this a good controller? Is it worth it for the money? Well, I think the first thing that we're going to have to talk about is its shape. It's obviously shaped in pretty much the exact same way as the Switch Pro controller. There are very minor, very subtle differences in between, and really in your hands, they feel kind of the same. You'll feel obviously much more differences from the buttons and other inputs themselves, but as far as actually holding the controller goes, they feel pretty much the same, and that's a good thing because the Switch Pro controller's shape is quite nice and quite comfortable. Probably the first thing you might notice about the body of this controller is that the Switch Pro controller has these. I don't even know what material this would be. It's not quite like rubber. It's harder than that, but it's like softer than the other plastic here. And that's what it uses for the handlebars here. It's supposed to be grippy, I suppose, but I never really found it to be helpful in any way. It just happens to be, I guess, by default, more grippy than the slick plastic that they used on the face. Whereas the PDP REMATCH instead doesn't have anything here in the front, but I don't find that to be a big deal at all. I don't really find this part of the controller to ever be slippery on anything. And on the back, it's cut and textured. I hope you can see it here on camera. It feels a little extra aggressive here, which, I guess I'll point out now. This controller comes with paddle buttons, which is awesome. I wish more controllers came with that by default. I'm pretty sure the Switch 2's does, so that's nice. But it's kind of similar here to where like the Xbox Series X controller has that as well. But the difference that you'll notice is the Series X controller, they're like a series of bumps, and they are quite grippy. They actually can grate your hands a little bit if you use it quite a bit. But here with the PDP REMATCH, rather than it being a series of bumps, there are a bunch of cuts, and you can see that they form these little square shapes for extra grip. Are you going to notice that at all? Probably not. But I will say that the Series X method is definitely more aggressive and more grippy than the PDP REMATCH's is. That being said, it does feel more aggressive on these paddles, which is really nice. Your middle fingers or whatever fingers you use for these never slip off, at least for me. So let's do some more, right? So let's start with the D-pad. The D-pad here feels actually pretty good. I've never been a fan personally of the offset stick position. I prefer like the PlayStation more symmetrical layout. I understand the gripes and complaints against that, but for me, like, I play a lot of modern games, but I play a lot of older games or just newer 2D games on modern platforms. So playing those with the D-pad in this position to me has always felt like off and awkward and weird. So I've always preferred it to be here. So now, with the D-pad here, it feels quite nice. I really have no complaints about it whatsoever. I mean, obviously I wish the positions were swapped, but what are you going to do? It feels great. I wish I actually had more to say about it. There's nothing particularly stand out, like amazing about it, and there's nothing wrong with it either. It's just kind of like, it's just good. I wish there was more, but it's just good. I guess the most I could say is I can compare it to this one. You can see, let me try to get both in frame. You can see it's a little bit more rounded on the edges than the Switch Pro controller, which I think feels nice. If you look at it from an angle, you see that the Switch Pro controller is pretty much flat. It's got a little bit of I guess you'd call it like just raising, towards the edges of each. But it's much deeper here. I think it's a little more obvious. I hope it comes up on camera. But it being a little bit deeper, I think does kind of feel nicer, especially if you're playing like a fighting game and you want to get like these quick half circles and quarter circles off. I don't feel that this D-pad's good about that. This D-pad's also quite a bit taller than the PDP rematch, so I guess it comes down to personal preference, but I think that the sharper corners, the more raised height on the Switch Pro controller, and it being less deep in the middle, I think actually makes this D-pad feel quite a bit better. If I had to pick between the two, I would pick this one. So I guess while we're talking about the D-pad, you've probably noticed the plus and minus here. So this little button here, when you press and hold it, this controls the volume of your headphones, because unlike the actual Switch Pro controller, unfortunately, you can actually plug a headset into this. It could be anything. It could be like Apple EarPods or like regular headphones, a gamer headset, whatever. But when you have it plugged in here, you just hold this button down, and then you can change the volume with this. This button also assigns the paddles on the back to whatever button you want. So it's nice and really easy to use. You don't have to install any apps or do anything. I know that there are controllers for Xbox, for example, where you have to download apps and do stuff like that with, but it's super nice, quick, and easy here. All right, let's talk about these sticks. Okay, let's start with the Switch Pro controller here, right? The Switch Pro controller uses the standard modern style for analog sticks, where it's convex, it's sunken in towards the middle, it's got raised edges, and those edges have grips. Now, some controllers have different types of grips on these edges here. Nintendo has opted to do horizontal gripping here, which kind of makes you slide around easy this way. Not good for that, but it is good for this type of motion. I think the logic here was that, you're always going to be kind of moving forward and back in some way. I don't know. I think that it's kind of misguided. I think that other controllers have certainly handled this better. So I find these sticks to be okay. I would say that they're really not my preference. I don't really care for this like more modern convex style, just overall. And I think that the grips on the rims are kind of bad. I think the Series X controller, for example, handles them much better. Now for the PDP rematch, it uses the same exact style. It uses, again, convex sticks, just like the Switch Pro controller. It's got these horizontal grips here on the rims, and the one thing that's really different about it is that they're much deeper. And I have to say, I kind of like it. I think if you're gonna go the convex route, you really should kind of go all the way. You can see, hopefully here, that there's not a lot of depth at all. It's only slightly sunken in. It barely really even feels sunken in. It more just feels like the edges are raised over it. But that's not really the case here. It's kind of a weird color for depth at this angle, at least on camera. So I hope you can see it, but they are quite a bit deeper. So I think that if you're gonna do that, you should definitely just go all the way. Because these do kind of like let the centers of your thumbs like really sink into them. And in that sense, they do feel kind of nice. So again, not my preference. Not my favorite type of analog stick. But for a controller that's attempting to fill the role of the Switch Pro controller in some way, I gotta give it props. It did do this better. It did do the D-pad better. It does have paddles. You can plug a headphone into it. Unfortunately, it's wired. Some people prefer that. Some people don't. But let's see. Maybe the rest of the controller is worse, and maybe it's not worth it. I don't know. Let's see. But I can say one thing about this controller that really bothers me is it's not really necessarily the fault of the controller. It's just because of how muscle memory works and trying to use both. The home and what do you even call these anymore? We keep changing the names of these buttons. Are they start, select? Are they plus, minus? Are they menu and view? Are they options and share? Like, can we get it together? Can we get some parity back where it was just start and select for everybody? Or I guess it was never was, because Xbox has start and back. Whatever, you get the point. Anyway, the positions are swapped, where the lower inner one on the Switch Pro controller is the home, and the outer upper one is we're just going to call it start, is the start button. And on the PDP rematch, that is completely flipped around. So if I'm switching back and forth between these controllers, I very often will hit the wrong button. I'll hit this trying to press home, or I'll hit home trying to press this. And it happens on both now. So it happens with this controller too, because I've used this so much. That being said, though, you know, they're like utility menu buttons. Like, you can't really mess up on these. Even if they don't feel great, it doesn't really matter that much because they're not really used in gameplay. But I will say that these feel nice. You know, they feel premium and as you'd expect. And these are a little more firm, but they're nice and clicky, and you know, they feel pretty good. I think I think it's just kind of a draw. I think the position thing is weird, and obviously, like, this is the control. Like, the whole reason this is here is because this is the main controller of the console that this is supposed to be for. So I guess I have to say that this would be, you know, objectively correct in its placement for these. So as a result, the placement for these is wrong. So I'm gonna, I guess, have to criticize it a little bit. If this wasn't the case and this was the proper order, then I would really have nothing bad to say about it. But their placement does induce these kind of annoying muscle memory issues. It's annoying, but it is what it is. Alright, let's go to the main buttons, the face buttons. Switch Pro controller. It's kind of hard to describe how these feel. They're kind of unique from other controllers that I've used. You can probably hear it, but I wouldn't really classify these as clicky. I would say, but they're not really mushy either. They're very unique in between. They feel fine. Like, I don't really have any gripes against them. They do kind of go for like an older school layout where the A and the Y are further separated than the B and the X. You know, if you turn it this way, it's a little easier to tell that these two are closer than these two. And that, I think, stemmed from the Super Nintendo. And I know that the PS1 controller, you know, the DualShock 1, 2, 3, you know, they all did that as well. I think the PS5 controller even does, but the PS4 did not, which is kind of interesting. Now, these ones are much more clicky. You should be able to hear how much louder they are. So these are very clicky. They feel very definitive when you're pressed. They're not mushy in any way. If you're trying to be quiet, maybe you're like playing or something and your wife is sleeping on the couch next to you or something, probably not the controller to use because they are quite loud. I still have the Series X controller over here. The Series X controller's buttons are also quite loud. It's a little more high-pitched, but they're about the same volume. And that's probably one of my biggest gripes with that controller in general. You can see, obviously, like, due to the theme, like, they're all the same color. But, you know, but Nintendo doesn't really use color anymore either, which I think is kind of a shame. I do miss, like, the original colors of, for example, like the Super Famicom. Colors would have been wonderful here, but I guess that's not a thing that they're interested in anymore. Nintendo seems to have lost their soul. So, sadly, these are also, you know, not colored in any different way. They're also, you notice that they're indented, and I guess, I don't know if you'd call it engraved or whatever, into the buttons themselves rather than just being written on them like the Switch Pro controller. I would say overall that, like, the sound is a little crazy. It's not a deal breaker, but it can be if you have to be quiet. But I would say the buttons overall feel better to push, and I think that matters more. Now, let's go on to these shoulder buttons. Now you have your L and your R, and your ZL and your ZR. I would say both of these feel great. I don't feel like I have to be in the middle or any particular spot to actuate these shoulder buttons, because there's a lot of controllers, shockingly, that do feel that way, and maybe I'm more sensitive to that because my hands are so big that I have to kind of use a slightly different grip angle from a lot of other people. But these controllers work great with their shoulder buttons. I can actuate them from any and every position, which is nice. It's something that I don't take for granted. As for these, same deal with those. They can also kind of be actuated from any point, which is nice. These feel great. Not as mushy as the face buttons, but more in that direction than the Rematch, which is more clicky. But they feel really good. So I guess in a lot of ways, I have the same things to say about them as the face buttons here. You can see the difference in the shape, whereas this is a little sharper and comes down to a further cut here. These are a bit more beveled and contoured, and they do feel a little nicer and a bit more premium. I think where a much bigger difference lies, though, is the ZR and ZL triggers. Now, they're not really triggers in the more traditional sense. The Switch controllers don't have analog triggers, which makes me wonder why they're shaped like this at all. I feel like this doesn't make a whole lot of sense if they're not even analog. They're just digital buttons. They should probably look something more akin to like the DualShock 2's L2 and R2. But anyway, like you'll notice like these are pretty tall, like in the back. They've got kind of a sharp like wing shape, and it looks sharper and more harsh than it actually feels. They actually do feel kind of nice, but these have a pretty different shape to them. They feel wider, even though, I don't know, you know what I was going to say, even though they're not that much wider, but they look at them here side by side, they definitely are. And I think my bigger fingers can really feel that and appreciate that. They also have like a much softer edge and contour here. These definitely feel softer and more mushy, but they feel really good. Now, which one's better? I think for these I'd have to give it to the Switch Pro controller, but there's nothing wrong with these either. They just don't feel as premium. So, all in all, the PDP Rematch for a controller that's, I don't know, between $25 and $18 new, which is a pretty fantastic price. I think I've showcased that, you know, it does stand up pretty well to the actual Switch Pro controller. You know, we have a better D-pad than the Switch Pro controller. We have better analog sticks than the Switch Pro controller. We've got the ability to plug in headphones. It's not wireless, so that's one thing, but it means it doesn't have to charge. So you have you know, volume controls. You have very intuitive ways to control that volume. You have paddle buttons and an intuitive way to assign those paddle buttons, which, by the way, makes Dark Souls Remastered on the Switch feel so much better. If I can assign like sprinting and rolling and stuff to these paddles, it's night and day. It feels so much better to play than it does on this. We have buttons that feel better, but are louder. We have a totally messed up order for all these menu buttons here, and maybe not quite as good, but still very, very nice, very solid shoulder buttons. So I guess at the end of the day, would I recommend the PDP Rematch? By the way, it comes in a whole bunch of other colors and styles. This is just the one that I found at GameStop, but I thought was cool. And for that price point, I would absolutely recommend it. And if I didn't have so many controllers in general, I would probably buy a couple more. But I have so many Switch controllers that I feel like it would just be a waste. But yeah, I would say definitely pick yourself up a PDP rematch. This really is a great third-party controller for a great price. So if you're looking to game on a budget, maybe you want to get some nice cheap controllers for your kids in case they break them. I think this would be a great option to get something cheaper without really sacrificing any utility or quality. And you even gain some with the paddle buttons and the ability to use a headphone. So yeah, that's it. That's the PDP rematch.